What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. It goes without saying that California has one of the best climates in the United States. And when it comes to tiny homes, you've got Tiny Fest here, you've got a lot of builders. So it's kind of been at the forefront of the tiny house industry as it's taken off in the past few years. But the question remains whether or not it's worth it or if it makes sense for you to actually go tiny here in California. So today that's what we're going to talk about. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you watch to the end because I'm going to talk about whether or not it's worth it to go tiny here in California. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about California and tiny homes. All right, welcome back. So today we're talking about California. We're talking about whether or not there is a California dream when it comes to tiny homes or not. And there's a lot of reasons for this. So California is a beautiful state. It's got wonderful weather. You can be near the beach, but you can also go hiking. There's opportunities for almost any outdoor recreational activity you can imagine. And there's been quite a few developments in the tiny house space in terms of builders, communities, and laws. But the question still remains whether or not it makes sense for you to go tiny here. So today I'm going to talk about what it looks like when you're looking for tiny homes to buy. We're going to go over laws and stuff like that. So if you were to go to tiny house listings right now and you were to put California into the search, this is what you would find. You would find a wide range of prices, homes and designs. There's no shortage of tiny homes for sale in California. So it's worth it to check out what Tiny House Listings has to offer because you never know what you could find. The price range is going to range quite a bit. You can have a tiny homes in 40 or 50K all the way over to upwards of over 100,000 or pushing 200K. So, but this is what it looks like if you're going to check out Tiny House Listings. When you're talking about builders, there's quite a few. I'm only going to mention a couple today, just in the interest of not having an exhaustive list, but Clever Tiny Homes is one that comes up because they've been able to create sort of high-end looking homes at like a reduced price. So you have Clever Tiny Homes, they're pretty well known. You have Pacifica Tiny Homes, which I've actually had here on the channel. This is what their website looks like. Pacifica does affordable homes. They have two main sort of like flagship models. They've got some new ones coming up as well too. And they're not too far from Los Angeles. Your other option, if you're looking at custom builders, I would say California is a huge market for custom built tiny homes. There's a lot of smaller tiny house companies that are building custom homes. The build time's a little longer, but it's worth the wait. Lifescape Builders is one of those tiny house companies. So they build some really beautiful custom homes. You can check out their website. This is what it looks like. They've got some really awesome models that are worth checking out. But if you're going to look at Zillow, and if you're going to look at sort of like the higher end of tiny homes, I think you can't really talk about California without talking about price. So I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you today in this video. California is a very expensive state to live in. San Diego was voted the most expensive city in the United States in 2023. And if you go to look at Zillow, you'll see something like this. So recently, a tiny home made headlines in California because a home that was 384 square feet went for $2 million. One bed, one bath in the Silicon Valley. So that's what you have to contend with. This is what the Zillow page looks like. The home recently sold. It already sold last year. This is what the home looked like. It's sold at this price point primarily because of the lot it was sitting on. It's sitting on about an 8,000 square foot lot, but nevertheless, it is a 384 square foot home going for $2 million. The real estate market in the state of California is unlike anything you'll see in most other states in cities in this country. And that is something that is part of the shaping and the framing and the understanding of the tiny house market as well too. So we've got to get into that as well. But when we're looking at tiny house laws, just like any other place, I say it over and over again, I sound like a broken record at this point, but it does vary a lot by county. When we're looking at Santa Cruz, they created an ordinance in 2022 that said you had to have a tiny home that's less than 400 square feet, but it can be a single family. You've got to have it permitted. It can be on wheels, which is huge. To have a tiny house on wheels be a permanent residence. Not a lot of cities allow that. You can only have one per parcel. It's got to be registered with the DMV still. And this was out of their sort of like reaction to the affordable housing crisis in the state of California and mostly things around affordability as well too. So you're going to see a lot of counties in California like this where they're creating permanent residence options for tiny houses on wheels. So that is a huge win for the state. But we still have to think about whether or not there's tiny house communities because not everybody wants to put an ADU in their backyard or a tiny house on wheels in their backyard or buy land. So when we're looking at tiny house communities, I'm only going to talk about a couple. So first is the tiny house block. So Tiny House Block isn't actually a formal tiny house community. It's more of a resort style setup, but it's one of the first of its kind, so I wanted to talk about it. It was when it first was created, so this is what their website looks like. It's totally worth checking out, visiting if you can. Gives you a great sense of what a tiny house would be like to live in if you bought one. It's about an hour northeast of San Diego, so it's not actually too far from where I'm at. It's resort style, like I said. It was one of the first of its kind when it happened and came out. But now they offer long-term stays, so you can park your tiny house there, but it's going to cost you $900 a month, which kind of again speaks to what I've talked about with the cost of living. Like you're going to pay for, the access to the beach and the virtually close to like 70-degree weather all year round. Next up is Tiny Tranquility Redwoods. I recently had Katie on the channel to talk about this brand new tiny house community that is in Hiochi, California. This is what their website looks like. If you've seen that video, you already have a good sort of like rundown of what that community is like and what they have to offer. If not, make sure you check it out. It's 15 minutes from the coast. It's near the redwoods. So you've got coast, you've got ocean and forest. They've got tiny houses on wheels, pretty large lots, $750 a month. Amenities, coming soon, dog park, pickleball, that sort of thing. And they also have homes for sale currently, so that's an option if you don't have a house already. So that's what the tiny house community landscape looks like, just sort of like a little snapshot. There's other communities. I'll make a video about tiny house communities down the line, but it's important to sort of look at all of this together and think about whether or not living tiny in California is worth it. And there's a couple things you have to consider. So first and foremost, what do you do if you want to go tiny in California? What are your options? You can get a tiny house on wheels, put it in a single family dwelling. You can do ADUs. ADUs are huge here, up and down the West Coast in general, primarily because there's a population density issue. So there's not a lot of space. So it's not like you have access to tons of land, and the land you do have access to comes at a premium, which I will talk about. So that creates a situation where it makes more sense to have an ADU on an existing property, maybe a family member's property or a friend, or to buy a smaller house, put an ADU there to generate some extra income. You can also go to the tiny house communities. There's some RV and mobile home parks in California that allow tiny homes, or you can buy land. So when we're talking about buying land, again, you've got to take this with a grain of salt. I don't want to sugarcoat things, but I do want to show you what the land options look like in California. So I was able to look at a couple of places, again, through Land Search. Great resource. Make sure you check it out. First up is land for sale in Lucerne Valley. You can get about 4 acres for $100,000. It has a structure on it, which makes it much easier for you in terms of being connected to all of the, resources for the city, like water and that sort of thing. But $100,000 for 4 acres is what you're looking for in that area. If you want to have like a little bit bigger structure, you want to be in Desert Hot Springs, they've got 4 acres for sale for $500,000. There's a house on it. But you see the contrast, right? So depending on where you're looking in California, either way you're going to pay a lot of money for land. But there's a huge difference between paying $100,000 for 4 acres and paying $500,000 for 4 acres. But this is kind of the market that you're in and what you're looking at, what you're up against if you're considering California. You can get 10 acres for about $500,000 in Joshua Tree. Now, Joshua Tree is a pretty popular destination, so it might be worth the investment. But again, in any of these cases, you have to have this much money set aside, or you have to have the ability to get a mortgage for this amount, get a loan and financing. So that's what you're thinking about when you're considering buying land, which I know a lot of you are thinking about land because you don't want to have to pay for renting in a tiny house community. I know some of you have dropped comments that you're worried about rent going up year after year. All of that's totally fair. So it's just a matter of where you're willing to move if you have the ability to buy land, if you can get approved for that high of a mortgage, depending on where you're at. So when we're looking at California, it comes down to a short list of pros and cons. I'm going to go over it. Is California a good option for tiny living? So on the plus side, you have tiny houses on wheels as single family dwellings. That is a huge plus. You've got land options. You've got community options, tons of tiny house community options, either formal communities or RV and mobile home parks. But again, I'll do a separate video about that later. And you've got the weather. I would say the two main selling points for this state are the weather, for those of you who like this climate, and for the tiny houses on wheels as single family dwellings. Now, the cons list is worth talking about as well too. The price of the land cannot be ignored. Most people don't have the ability to get approved for a $500,000 mortgage for a house, let alone just for land, and then you got to put the house there. The location of the land, a lot of the land I found is in more of like desert regions in California. I don't know what it looks like if you're buying land in less desert regions in California. I've seen like really small parcels of land in this state for $500,000, so you just have to be careful location-wise. The communities that exist, you have to sort of wonder about availability, wait list, and then again, the laws vary, which is just going to be a con in any state, but it's worth putting up here for California. So what do you think? Would you move to California? First question. If you were to move to California, what would it look like for you to go tiny? Are you willing to buy land? Do you have that ability? Do you know if you want to go for a tiny house on wheels or ADU? What are you looking to do? What are you interested in? Because I know a lot of you are curious about the West Coast, and I know if you're thinking of the West Coast, California is probably higher on your list than like Oregon or Washington. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't seen the video on Tiny Tranquility Redwoods here in California, make sure you check that out. That's worth checking out as a community in general because it's new now, so you don't have to worry about the wait list they've got with Tiny Tranquility up in Oregon, which is extremely long. But yeah, I'll keep looking up communities. I'll probably make the California Tiny House Communities video soon, so keep an eye out for that, and don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.